would like to thank you for your patience. You know, technology is a wonderful thing when it works, and now it works. I'd like to welcome you to a look at Common Core state standards. I am Finn Larson, Executive Director of Christian Educators Association International. As a professional association for Christian teachers that work both in public and in private schools, you probably won't be shocked that we've gotten a lot of calls about Common Core. A lot of questions, a lot of concerns. That's really why we're having the meeting here today that we're looking at as a community meeting. When you leave today, I would say before you leave today, you should have all those questions answered that you've come with. The way the program will work today is that first David Barton from Wall Builders will give us an overview of some of the issues of Common Core. Then we've invited a panel of local experts that we'll invite up and introduce later, along with David, to take any questions you have. You notice there are mics in the on the front of the stage that will ask you to come up and ask questions later on. When you came in, you should have gotten a white envelope. The white envelope has two opportunities in it. First of all, some of you may not have registered online before you've come, so you have another opportunity to register. What we're looking for basically is your name and email address. And what we want that for is following this session, we will contact you by email because we've had many people say, we really would like to record what's happening here today. Well, we are putting tonight's program on video, and we'll make that available free to all of you because we want to get the information out. And so we'll spread the word locally through you, and then we hope that you will spread the word to all those in your sphere of influence. I said there were two opportunities in there. In that envelope is also a financial opportunity. And I know you're thinking, oh, I thought it was free. It is free to you. We believe it's important enough for our association to invest in this event. So the good news is all the bills have been paid. You don't have to stay after and work for your entrance here. And our goal is really not to recoup those funds. But I know I really appreciate the ministry of David Barton and Wall Builders. They have been able to bring the truth of our history by not looking through the lens of political correctness or the lens of political party, but looking back at original documents and sharing a truth that many of us would not have access if it weren't for David Barton and his team. So when he leaves today, besides the fees for putting on this program in this beautiful facility, we want to give a love offering to David and Wall Builders. And we want to give you an opportunity to be part of that. If you appreciate what he's doing and appreciate what you hear here tonight, we would encourage you to make a donation on your way out. We'll have staff at the exits to collect those, and you can give cash. We still accept U.S. currency at this point. Don't know how long, but we do now. We do accept gold. But or you can write a check to Christian Educators Association or even charge. If you have, depending on your relationship with the IRS, some of you may want to have a tax-deductible receipt for your donation. If you would like a tax-deductible receipt, on that white envelope, put your name and address, and we will mail that back to you in case the auditors are waiting for you somewhere in the wings. You know, I could probably take 6 hours to introduce David Barton. I'm just phenomenally blessed by what he has done for America. I will just say two short statements about him before we call him up here. One, he is a fabulous educator. I think we can all learn from him, those of us that are educators. But he's also an astounding historian. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a welcome to America's historian, David Barton.
Thanks, Ben. Appreciate it. Thanks, guys. Thank y'all. I want to talk about Common Core. Before I do, there's just a whole lot out there. There's a lot of websites. Common Core is a clearinghouse website. because there's a lot of state groups and a lot of local groups that are doing things. So if you want information on Common Core more than all of us will be able to cover tonight, this is something that you can literally spend a lot of time in. Go to haltcommoncore.com. There's a lot of information there. It keeps you also updated on what the legislative status is in all 50 states. You've got friends on Facebook and other social media that will ask about Common Core, and you can send them to groups in their state. So let me send you that as a reference first. Let's talk about Common Core, and I'm going to start right up front by telling you some of the general problems. You'll hear more about them tonight, but I want to tell you where we are and then look at where we were, and then we'll come back to where we are. So looking at Common Core, there's 8 major problems that we'll point to. The problems with Common Core, problem number 1 is it standardizes mediocrity and it lacks academic rigor. That's a real easy one to demonstrate. By the way, if you go to that Halt Common Core website, they've got all 8 of these items listed there with documentation for it. I'm just telling you the overview of the problem. It is not a rigorous material. It has not used tested materials in creating a lot of the standards. A lot of the people who were on the composite boards that drafted this stuff that actually were the professors said this is terrible stuff, and they're the ones speaking out against it. The political people, they really like what happened, but the academic educators don't like what happened in the content. So it is not rigorous. The testing that has happened so far in states that have used the Common Core standards have been very disappointing. It has not indicated a growth in knowledge. It has indicated a decrease in knowledge, so it hasn't been good. Second thing I'd point to is that it undermines local and state controls and accountability, abrogates federalism as well as parental rights. What we have found through a number of states who have already dealt with this, for example, when they were dealing with this in Michigan, the state superintendent of public instruction in Michigan said, well, the way this is set up is if you have a complaint as a parent and go to the school, they're going to have to send you to the state, and we're going to have to send you to the feds to do this because we can't handle, there's nothing we can change in so much of this. A lot of it just doesn't matter what kind of complaints we get, we're going to be fixed with it. And so it really is not a local control situation, which is what is preferable. Certainly the Constitution had established to make sure that education stayed in the state hands. And while we are told that this is a state standards initiative, I'm going to show you how that's changed. They love that. That's great for their propaganda, but it's not accurate on what's there. So it is not a state standard initiative. It started that way, but it is morphed into something totally different. We'll talk about that in just a moment. So that's another problem, is if you're a fan of constitutional government, this violates it in all sorts of ways. It does not put control where it should, and it does not put education in the hands of the right jurisdictions. Third thing I would point to is that this state standard stuff, you see where state standards, that's the way it started because a lot of the governors got together and said, whoa, we've had it with the federal government trying to take over education. And by the way, if you're not familiar with what the Constitution does on that, the Constitution originally empowered the federal government in 15 jurisdictions of authority. That's it. There are enumerated powers, so listed out. That's what they can do. The Founding Fathers said if it's not one of those, it belongs to the 9th Amendment or the 10th Amendment. And by the way, I'm going to use the Founding Fathers as a collective group tonight. Let me tell you, up front, we have about 100,000 documents from before 1812. So I have thousands of handwritten documents of George Washington, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, all these guys, thousands of documents of education. And so when I say the Founding Fathers, I can give you lots of documentation, but just for brevity tonight, we're not going to do that. The Founding Fathers made it real clear that if it's not one of those 15 enumerated powers, it belongs to the 9th Amendment, the people, the 10th Amendment, the states. And it's just real simple. We had constitutional amendments. We've had 17 constitutional amendments added since the Bill of Rights, and that gave the federal government 2 additional powers. So there are now 17 constitutionally designated powers for the federal government. Outside of that, everything belongs to the state and the people. It's interesting that in 1792, on the floor of Congress, they were having a debate over whether the federal government should bail out private industries that were too big to fail. Same thing we heard 5 years ago. And at that time, James Madison took to the floor of Congress and said, whoa, he said, if we start bailing out if we as the federal government start bailing out private industries that are too big to fail under the General Welfare Clause, which is exactly what they did 6 years ago, he said, if we do that, he said, the next thing you know, the federal government will start thinking it has control of education. It'll start thinking it has control of police. It'll start thinking it has control of highways. And he went through all this stuff, and everybody laughed about it and said, wouldn't that be ridiculous? Well, here we are. You know, that's where the federal government is in all those areas because we've lost that concept of what the original jurisdiction was. So that's what that deals with. State standards is where the governors got together and said, we are tired of the federal government trying to get in on education. You had a Department of Education created under President Jimmy Carter, became one of the cabinet-level departments. That gave it a lot of federal clout. From then, they've moved on out with No Child Left Behind, Race to the Top, all the other programs they have. And so the governors wanted to push back. They said, this is our jurisdiction, not the federal government jurisdiction. And so it started as a way to push back and make sure that you didn't have problems for intrusion in the federal government. The other thing it was designed to do was you had the governors getting together, and a kid would move from Mississippi to Montana and find out when he got to Montana, he's a sophomore in high school, but what he covered as a sophomore in high school in Mississippi wasn't anywhere close to what he's covering up there, and so it cost him an extra couple of years to get his degree all fixed. And the governor said, well, we'll take care of our own content, but surely we can kind of get close on how, because you have 20% of the nation that moves every year now. Every year, 20% of the nation has a new address. So what do we do with people who are moving all the time, the mobility we have? Surely we can come up with a way that we kind of got math in the same general ballpark, and we got grammar in the same general ballpark and literature. And that's what the governors wanted to do, was come up with something that would allow kids to move between the states, not have standardized state standards. Each state would set their own standard, but you could have some cooperation where you could have algebra generally at the same time in high school. You could have other courses generally at the same time. So that was part of what it was designed to do, was help the states. Now, what happened is it moved from being state standards to now being called national standards. I was recently with some of the guys in Congress, specifically the chairman of the House Education Committee. And if you don't know, the House itself has already voted to completely defund all Common Core at the federal level. There's not going to be any money for it, except they just can't get that picked up in the Senate. So the House gets it, the Senate doesn't get it. So at the House level, the head of the Education Committee, he said, when this started 2 or 3 years ago, they kept talking about state standards. He said about 3 years ago, they started talking about national standards. It's no longer states, it's now national standards. He says, and now in front of my committee, he said they don't even say national standards anymore. He says they now call it national curriculum. Now, national curriculum is what we're not supposed to have. Each state does its own curriculum. So it really has not, it's morphed from being, morphed away from being what was something controlled by the states to something that now is controlled by the federal government. It is a national curriculum. I say federal government, it's really not federal government, but it's a lot of folks funded by the feds, and they cooperate with the feds and work with the feds, and that's why you get all these little waivers on federal programs if you'll engage in this Common Core stuff. So that's the second reason. Third reason is the implementation be costly for states and schools. They want to move high technology. A lot of the states have said, we can't even buy crayons for our kids. And you want us to give an iPad to every kid with all the stuff? How are we going to do that? So it has turned out to be very expensive for local levels. Again, there's a lot more information you can find on this. I'm just giving you general categories. It introduces new and untested educational methods and methodology. I love what happened with trigonometry. Trigonometry with the Common Core materials was actually introduced by mathematicians in the Soviet Union. And they did it about 30 years ago. And it was such a failure there that they completely dropped it. That's all right. We can make it work in America. We can make anything work. We have all sorts of things that have never proven to work anywhere in the world, but we're convinced that we can make them work if we can just do it. So we're using our kids as guinea pigs, and so far the experiment has not turned out well. As I've mentioned, there's been a lot of states who have been highly disappointed with what happened with the testing scores of their kids, because this is untested stuff. It's untested methodology. I'm going to show you a couple of video clips of that in a little bit, but this is, again, just general overviews. The fifth reason is data mining is particularly intrusive and dangerous to constitutional rights. What happens is they are using the kids to get a lot of information on you and your family and your home. And of course, the Common Core proponents say, there's no data mining in that. That's all black helicopter stuff. You're crazy. It's interesting that just about 4 weeks ago, when Georgia had their hearing in their legislature on dealing with Common Core, one of the bills the Georgia legislature introduced was to ban all data mining. They were trying to disassemble Common Core piece at a time, and they went after the piece that says we want no data mining out of what goes on in our schools. We got privacy issues, and we don't want the kids given all this information. And the argument for proponents is, we need this. If we have that information, we can tailor it and help the kids get a better learning experience. If we know whether you're Republican or Democrat or liberal or conservative, if we know how much money you make, if we know what your religion is, are you Catholic, are you Protestant, if we know then we can tailor the kids' educational experience to whatever you are. If we know your income level, if you're in poverty or if you're a billionaire, whatever you are, we can. And so that's their argument. The more we know about you, the more effective we can make education. Well, on the other hand, they say they don't do data mining, but it's interesting, when Georgia had their hearing, guess who showed up to object to the bill? The folks who showed up to object to the bill were Google. They said, we want to keep the data mining. That's been really valuable for us. We need it. Google no, wait a minute. These are the guys showing up saying, don't take this out of Common Core because it helps us. And on the other hand, they're saying, oh no, data mining's all black helicopter. It's all those conspiracy people. Well, then what were they doing at the hearing? They obviously know what's in it, and that's another indication data mining's there. The sixth is it includes open and overt philosophical indoctrination in numerous specific areas. There's a lot of ways to show that. Robert Scott, who is the state superintendent of public education in Texas, is the first state in the United States to say no to Common Core. When he went through all the standards, and at that point there was only a couple of courses that they had standards for, and as he went through it, he was really disturbed by what he saw with the math area, because in the math area, it gave you problems to solve, but the problems were dealing with science and indoctrination, quite frankly, because on the math areas, they were asking you to solve problems showing global warming. Well, that's okay, maybe, if you do the other side. I've been appointed in a bunch of states to write history and government standards in those states, and one of the things we always do is we shoot for balance. We want our standards to have no tone at all. When we get done, you can't tell whether liberal or conservative. We don't care, because in history, you're supposed to teach the good, the bad, the ugly. You just teach all of it the way it is. So if you want to teach McCarthyism, that's fine, but you also teach the Venona papers that the Soviets released when the wall came down to show that, there were a bunch of spies in Hollywood, and we had Russia says we had them there. So it's okay to go after McCarthy for the way he treated folks, but you also got to acknowledge that there was some reality to what was going on. It was just handled wrong. So have balance. That's not what happens in the standards. They will give you one side of one position and stop there, and there's no balance. And they're very inflammatory type positions that they take that tick off a lot of people, particularly conservatives. So a lot of indoctrination there. This is a good example. This is one of the Common Core line books that's there. It does have a good 19 pages on Islam and about a half a page on Christianity. Now that's maybe a little biased, slightly. I think with 32% of the world being Christian, 21% being Muslim, you got a little more influence of Christianity in world history than you do Islam, but see, that's not the way the books are. They have a bias in them. You have the same thing with this history book. It was interesting that when they did the Bill of Rights, rather than writing out the Bill of Rights for students to see, they interpreted the Bill of Rights for the students, because students aren't smart enough to read things for themselves. So they told the students that the First Amendment guarantees separation of church and state. Sorry, that's not in the First Amendment. And then it said the Second Amendment allows the military to own guns. Really? That's the Second Amendment? Allows the military? They just went through and reinterpreted all of the amendments to their viewpoint and didn't tell the kids that it was interpretation. They just laid it out there as if that's the actual content of the Bill of Rights. So again, that's indoctrination. That's not letting kids read the documents for themselves. The seventh is supplementary and recommended materials contain much dark, depressive, and offensive content. The Common Core line literature books, here's just 4 examples. If you read any of these, and they run from 9th to 11th grade on recommended levels, you read any of those, you would find sections that I don't care what viewpoint you come from, you'd consider it pornographic. Even if you worked in the pornography industry, you'd call it pornographic because you would recognize it for what it is. And so here you got high school kids reading this. And by the way, speaking of pornographic content, did you see what happened a week or so ago in the Oklahoma legislature? One of their senators, Josh Brasheen, started reciting all this pornographic content on the floor of the Oklahoma Senate. And it was so offensive that parents were taking their kids and heading for the doors because of all the stuff that was being said. And the Senate president jumped up and went and grabbed the mic and was going to shout him down. And Josh turned and said, by the way, he said, I know what you're about to do. You're about to tell me this is not appropriate to read here in the Senate. I'm just reading to you out of Common Core books. And if it's not appropriate in the Senate, tell me why it's appropriate for our classrooms. And guess what? The book he was reading out of was called The Bluest Eye, which is one of those books. And so they go, that's in the textbooks? Well, guess what? A Common Core got whacked in Oklahoma. They decided that wasn't the right thing to do. So the content was sufficient. The 8th thing I'll point to is just a simple one. It reshapes all education, including private Christian homeschools by means of testing criterion. One of the things we've known for a long time is that testing is what drives education. We can write good standards in states, and people praise us for having good standards, and we say, well, it really doesn't matter what the standards are. the next step is making sure that publishers get the content get the standards in the textbook, because we've got great standards. You don't write great textbooks, doesn't matter how good the standards are. But then, see, the publishers, doesn't matter what they put in the textbooks, it matters what shows up on the final testing, because everything is run by testing. And teachers teach to the test because that's where merit pay is tied, that's where performance, all these incentives are tied. And so if kids don't pass the test, then the teachers in school are in trouble. So it really doesn't matter what's in the standards or what's in the textbook, it matters what shows up on the test. Now, what you're going to have is you're going to have a lot of Christian schools and private schools and home schools who say, hey, we're not going to participate in this indoctrination stuff. We're going to teach good history, and we're going to teach good literature, and we're going to go through all the good stuff, which is fine, but then you're going to have to take something like the SAT test that David Coleman is over, and he's announced he's going to make it Common Core aligned, which means your kids won't know all the right indoctrination answers, which means they may end up 100 points lower on the SAT, which means they won't have the choice of universities and colleges they want to go to because they'll have a lower score and can't get into those colleges. And so the pressure will be on private education to conform to all the Common Core standards because the testing is being changed to match the Common Core standards. So even if you think you can be independent, it's going to be a hard thing to do because your kids will not come up with the same high testing scores that you'll have with other kids who want to compete and go to the college of their choice. So that's 8 reasons. What I want to do here for a moment is I want to show you a short video, and it kind of summarizes some of the stuff. It's some clips. It's something we did on TV a while back. So let me step aside a minute and watch this video for the next few minutes. And then after that, we'll come back and talk about some more of this. This old stuff represents true academic rigor. Education today is moving further and further away from it, and Common Core certainly seems to be contributing. And maybe part of the problem is the new teaching methods that are associated with teaching Common Core. Look at this clip from M.J. McDermott, a local television personality in Washington State. She's going to explain one of the crazy new ways that math is being taught there. Watch this.
Another popular algorithm taught in everyday math is the lattice method. Same problem, 26 times 31. This time we have to set up a lattice. It works like this. We put the 26 on top and the 31 along the side like that. And then we draw these diagonals. And then we do 1 times 6 and fill it in like that, 0, 6. 3 times 6, 18. 1 times 2, no effort to say 1 times 20, by the way, 0, 2. And 3 times 2, 0, 6. Now we add it up along the diagonal. 6, 8, 0 plus 2 is 10, carry the 1. 6, 7, 8, and 0 is 8, and a 0 there. And the answer is read this way. There's your answer, 806. It's kind of fun. It works every time. But even the authors of Everyday Math admit in their teacher's manual why the lattice method works is not immediately obvious, but it is very efficient and powerful. The principal disadvantages of the algorithm are that it is unfamiliar to many adults, i.e. parents, and making the lattice takes time.
Okay, so teaching this new lattice method of working problems is going to help student knowledge? I don't think so. But you see, this is one of the fundamental problems with progressives. It doesn't matter how well something is already working or how long it's been working well. They're always wanting change. They're always wanting to move forward or lean forward. And they want to leave the old things behind. You see, progressives are all about progress after all. They want to implement the new, even if the old works well and the new doesn't. And did you notice that MJ pointed out that parents will not know the lattice method? So parents won't even be able to help their own kids with math. And this is also part of what progressives do. They want everyone dependent on them. They want the kids to rely on government officials for their knowledge and help, not on their parents. But let's not stop with just using new and impossible teaching methods. Let's look at this clip from a recent educational conference and notice a statement that kids getting the right answer is not necessarily the overall objective of progressive math education. Watch this.
Even under the new Common Core, even if they said 3 times 4 was 11, if they were able to explain their reasoning and explain how they came up with their answer really in words and in oral explanations, and they showed it in the picture, but they just got the final number wrong, We're really more focusing on the how.
The right answer doesn't really matter, just how you got it? Okay, now I understand. Maybe she was trying to say that it was important for kids to know why things worked. That is, to know the process behind getting the right answer, and that's fine. All right, I buy that. But to say that in education under Common Core we're not going to focus on getting right answers? How about getting right answers and getting the process? You see, maybe this is why test scores dropped in Kentucky. Who knows? But in addition to all of these immediate problems, Common Core also presents serious problems for the future of the Republic.
Common Core. It's the new national educational initiative that not only weakens local and state controls of education, but also fundamentally changes what students will learn. For example, standards teach that the future of the planet is threatened by man-made global warming. But there has been no global warming for almost 2 decades, and this despite the steadily rising atmospheric carbon dioxide that supposedly drives global warming. And we're also told that global warming's melting of the polar ice caps would cause sea rise and massive coastal flooding. Yet ice is actually expanding in Antarctica, which has 90% of the Earth's ice. And it even turns out that data was misrepresented by global warming alarmists to make recent temperatures look warmer than they've actually been and past temperatures look cooler. Yet none of these facts prevent Common Core from making man-made global warming a fundamental part of its education standards. This is not education, it's political indoctrination. Just one more of the many reasons why Common Core is bad for students, bad for states, and bad for America.
And here's another one on a different issue.
Common Core. Maybe you've heard of it. It's the new national educational initiative that not only weakens local and state controls of education, but also fundamentally changes what students will learn. For example, under Common Core, cursive handwriting will no longer be taught. But that sounds reasonable. After all, kids send text, Facebook, and email messages to each other, so who needs cursive writing? But this means that students will no longer be able to read the journals of George Washington, or the letters of John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, or James Madison, or for that matter, even the Constitution or the Declaration of Independence, which are written in cursive. In fact, students won't even be able to read the letters that their own grandparents or great-grandparents may have written and saved for their family's heritage. Under Common Core, cursive writing will become a language as foreign to students as ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics. Removing a student's ability to directly study American historical documents is just one of the many reasons why Common Core is bad for students, bad for states, and bad for America. Contact your legislators and let them know that you oppose Common Core.
I tell you, it's not a good thing not to be able to read early American documents for yourself. In fact, let me tell you how I first got involved in history some years ago. I was a school principal, and I read some really old documents that I'd been taught about in school. But when I read those actual documents for myself, I found that those documents were dramatically different from what my teachers and textbooks had taught me about those documents. That's when we started collecting documents. And now we have more than 100,000 originals or copies of originals from before 1812. Every student should be able to read America's founding documents for themselves, but that becomes much harder with Common Core. And in addition to the lack of academic rigor in Common Core, the dumb teaching methods used, and severing us from the ability to check our own history, there's also the data mining part of Common Core. Remember this article from the Blaze? Indoctrination, data mining, and Common Core. Here's why America's schools may be in more trouble than you think. And remember this article? American Thinker. There seems to be little recognition yet that the Common Core gives schools and third parties unprecedented access to students' personal information. The federal government is acquiring a massive amount of data that can be sold to the highest bidders. So, they'll take our private data? Well, that really shouldn't worry anyone. I mean, we trust the government to do the right thing with all that data they're going to collect from our kids about us. And if you want proof they'll do the right thing? That's easy. Just think of how well the NSA and the IRS have protected and respected our personal data. I mean, so what's the worry? Okay, so maybe there is some history of the government agencies abusing our personal data, but remember, this data collected about us from our kids can be sold to private groups. And what's so bad about that? All you have to do is listen to what David Coleman has to say, and you can immediately see the problems and the dangers. David Coleman is the president of the College Board, and they're the ones who produce the SAT test for college-bound students. Time magazine calls him, quote, the architect in education, because, as they explain, his quiet work behind the scenes on the proposed Common Core standards makes him among the most influential figures in American education today. So David Coleman, who definitely strongly supports Common Core, is going to give us an example of how private information can be used in sophisticated ways to advance progressive causes. Listen to this clip of him at a New York educational conference.
Let's remember who really won the election. Shall we call it Nate Silver? Against all the blowhards of political commentary, the predictions of the nerds were decisive. But perhaps more exciting than the person who stood to the side and handicapped the election is the person who led the Obama campaign's use of data to galvanize a generation of low-income people to vote like they had never had before. Whether you are Republican or Democrat, the simple precision and excellence of the use of information to achieve a result is something in my mind that deserves astonishment. It means, again, that there is no force greater. Think about it. Think about it. Hundreds of millions of dollars spent on this campaign. And what made the difference, right? A lot of things. But this incredible precision and insight gained from data, not only knowing where people are, but testing various interventions, seeing what works, keeping focused on delivering them.
That's not how I want my private information used. And I don't care whether it's for the Obama campaign or anybody else's campaign. I don't want the government collecting more information about me, and I especially don't want it done through my unsuspecting kids. So that's some of the things that are out there. Again, there's a lot more to go through. I'm going to jump ahead real quick here and show you, just on the interest of time, some of the things that need to happen here. Common Core, just in Texas, we have a saying, essentially what Common Core is doing is they're trying to put lipstick on a pig. And the reason is they've got a wrong philosophy. I want to show you a philosophy real quick. They're chasing their tail. It will not work. And the reason it will not work is because of what George Mason told us. George Mason's a founding father. He's one of the 55 guys who wrote the Constitution. He did not sign the Constitution. He went back and said, we need greater protection for individual freedoms. He's the guy who really is responsible for the Bill of Rights. So he is to this day called the father of the Bill of Rights. He also is the guy who wrote the Virginia Constitution, and the Virginia Constitution was done actually 2 months before the Declaration of Independence was. Virginia separated from Great Britain before America did, and Thomas Jefferson used much of what George Mason had done in the Virginia Constitution in the Declaration of Independence. One of the statements George Mason made in the Virginia Constitution that is still kept alive to this day in Virginia, great statement. He said this. He said, no free government, nor the blessings of liberty can be preserved to any people but by a frequent recurrence to fundamental principles. Now, this frequent recurrence to fundamental principles, going back to basics, is what education has to do if it's going to survive. You look at where we are now with testing compared to previous generations. Why did it work then, and why does it not work now? There's a reason things do work, and there's a reason things don't work. And just because you put lipstick on a pig doesn't mean it's not a pig still. And so it goes back to the philosophy of those governing principles. It's the same reason that pro teams always have their spring training or their baseball camps or anything else. Doesn't matter how good you are at baseball, every year you go back to the basics. Every year you go back to fielding and hitting and pitching and all. And if you have a slump in the season, the coach will take you off the side and you go back to basics again. And so this thing of keeping going back to basics is what makes a real difference. And that's what education has to do. Now, I'm going to skip ahead here for a little bit. Pardon me for a second while I fly ahead here and get past some things just in the interest of time. What I want to hit is that America has been an exceptional nation, and that's a term that was given us in 1831 by Alexis de Tocqueville, who said America is exceptional. I can show you our creativity, our prosperity, I can show you our stability, but we are exceptional. Why? The reasons given in our birth certificate, our Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence told us the philosophy that produced who we are as a people is significant because in 126 words, they give 5 principles. Now, what happens today is we don't teach principles. We teach specifics. I'll show you why that changed. It changed in the 1930s and 40s and 50s with the way we did education. But we used to teach principles, and principles are very important. The Founding Fathers were big fans of principles. Most folks today cannot name the 5 principles on which American government is based. Now, we used to have kids know that, and they memorized that, and they learned it. We don't do that now. But the other aspect of principles is take something like the 10 Commandments. That is a principle-driven document. And I say this because I've been involved in 7 cases at the U.S. Supreme Court. And one of the issues that we were involved with about 15 years ago for probably 20 cases was displays of the 10 Commandments, whether they were at school, whether they were at courthouses, whether they were in public parks, whatever. And the judges kept striking them down because they said, well, you guys keep saying the 10 Commandments influenced American culture and society and law, but there's lots of stuff that influenced American culture and society and law. And you know, if you would take the 10 Commandments and surround them with other government documents that shaped American law, then we would let you keep the 10 Commandments. And these knothead judges would say, and what you ought to surround them with is things like the Code of Justinian and Hammurabi's Code and other great legal documents. And that told me instantly they didn't have a clue what they were talking about. Because if you read the Code of Justinian, they think the 10 Commandments is too religious. You read the Code of Justinian, and right up top it says, we enact this code in the name of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, and it goes on evangelical-wise, and they think that putting that beside the 10 Commandments will make the 10 Commandments less religious. You know, how nuts is that? But then the Code of Hammurabi. Now, Hammurabi's code, this is fairly interesting because this is a code that existed 300 years before God gave Moses the 10 Commandments. So this is the oldest known code. So since this has such a great impact on America, if you'll hang it up beside the 10 Commandments, see, problem is this code was not discovered until 1904. So tell me how that had a great impact on the founding era. Was it not discovered until and that's older than the 10 Commandments? And the problem with the code is it has about 282 laws in it, and they're not principle-driven. And this is the way that so many nations in Europe are. They don't have principles in their documents. They have specifics. They want everything driven by specifics. And look at some of the laws out of this code. If any man bring an accusation against a man, and the accused go to the river and leap into the river, if he sink in the river, his accuser shall take possession of his house. Now, that's an interesting way to start things off. Then it says, but if the river proved that the accused is not guilty, I guess that means he didn't drown when he jumped in. So if he jumps in and didn't drown, it proves he's not guilty, and he escaped unhurt, then he who had brought the accusation shall be put to death, while he who leaped into the river shall take possession of the house that had belonged to his accuser. Now, do you think there's a chance we can enact a law like that today? No, because it's not principle-driven. See, that's what made the Constitution so cool. Who cares that they didn't have internet back at the time of the Founding Fathers? Who cares that horses were the fastest form of transportation? They didn't give specifics. They gave principles, and principles are timeless, like the principle of gravity or Boyle's law of gases or any of the other, the law of 3 laws of thermodynamics. So there's one. Let me show you another one out of Code of Hammurabi. 132. If the finger is pointed at a man's wife about another man, accused of adultery, but she is not caught sleeping with the other man, she shall jump in the river for her husband. I don't know what it is with the river and these people. There's something about the river and these people. You go through their 282 laws, there's only 2 or 3 laws out of 282 that could still be used today. Now, how many of these could be used today? Well, I think we can still do the don't murder and the honor your parents, and I think we can still do the avoid the profanity. It's principle-driven, and that's what makes it work, is it's principle-driven. And that's what education does not do anymore, is they don't go into principles. They keep going into trying to, rearrange the deck furniture on the Titanic. So that's the problem we have. That's why the Constitution has been so significant, so big. Abraham Lincoln made this statement. He said, the philosophy of the schoolroom in one generation will be the philosophy of government in the next. The time I have left, what I want to take you through is the philosophy of government and philosophy of education that produced our philosophy of government. Because the Founding Fathers learned these principles from somewhere. Where'd they get it? They got it from education. If you go back and look at education, the philosophy of early education had 3 objectives. The 3 things that early American education was designed to do: number 1, it was designed to teach religion, morality, and knowledge. I'll show you that phrase in a minute. It's a phrase that you should know in Ohio. It's part of your state constitution. Religion, morality, knowledge. The second one is it was to teach thinking skills. And the third purpose of education was to instill and to raise high expectations. Those were 3 principles that drove everything that went on in American education. Let me take that first one. Let's take that first one of teaching religion, morality, and knowledge. When America had become a nation and we were a federal nation, 1789, we have the Constitution, we have the first Congress of the United States, they have a dilemma because they say, you know, we've got 13 states now. They used to be colonies. We've got 13 states. But what are we going to do with those people over in the Ohio Territory and the Northwest Territory? And what do we do with the Southern Territory? And they went through all these territories and said, how do you become a state in the United States? And so to become a state in the United States, they said, well, what we'll do is we'll give you a provision whereby you can meet the criterion. And it was called the Northwest Ordinance. And that's where the first 6 states came, was out of the Northwest Territories. Where Ohio came was out of the Northwest Territory. So what happens is the Senate, the House of Representatives passed the Northwest Ordinance on the 17th of July, 1789. Senate passed it on the 4th of August, 1789, and George Washington signed it into law August the 7th, 1789. Now, what's significant about it, and this is, all the states were brought in, 32 states came in. So you had the original 13, the next 32 came in under the Northwest Ordinance provisions. It said, all right, you get 40,000 in your territory, you set up a territorial form of government, you have to have a judiciary that does, and it just looked like the Constitution. And when it got to education, it dealt with education in Article 3 of the Northwest Ordinance, and it said this: religion, morality, and knowledge being necessary to good government and the happiness of mankind, schools and the means of education shall forever be encouraged. We believe that you have to have religion, morality, and knowledge to have good government and happy mankind, and that's why we have schools, is so that we can teach religion, morality, and knowledge, which is interesting. That's why your Constitution in Ohio says forever in the public schools of this state, religion, morality, and knowledge will be taught. It's still there in the Constitution of North Carolina, of Iowa, of Michigan. All these states, 32 states, came in with that provision. This is a big deal. Now, try finding an educator today who knows that's in their state constitution. Matter of fact, a quick example, legal issue. North Carolina had a junior high kid in North Carolina at a school in North Carolina at a rural school. And rural schools are ones that are more lenient. You can get away with a lot more to rural school usually than you can other types of schools. And this kid, in his passing period at his own locker, would reach in his locker between classes and pull out literature, and he would invite his friends to come to a Fellowship of Christian Athletes meeting. He would invite his friends to go to youth group meeting with him. He'd give them literature. And one of the teachers saw this kid giving out literature at his own locker, and that teacher went and got the principal, who went and got the superintendent of that little district, and all 3 of the adults came back and surrounded that kid and jumped on him with all 6 feet and said, you will take this out of your locker. You will take this home. This is absolutely illegal. Don't you dare bring this back to school. And that 8th grade kid, surrounded by those 3 senior adults, had the guts and the gumption to reach into his locker, and he pulled out a copy of the North Carolina State Constitution. He opened it up. He said, you know, it says right here that in the public schools of this state, religion and morality will be taught as well as... And they said, really? Where? They didn't have a clue. So that's the big deal to the Founding Fathers. And by the way, that religion, morality, and knowledge aspect, that's why you find it in so many state constitutions. Also, Benjamin Rush, Founding Father. John Adams said he's one of the 3 most notable Founding Fathers. We'll never study him in school today because he did too much that's right. We like to criticize our founders, not talk well about them. Benjamin Rush is called the father of public schools under the Constitution. He started 5 universities. 3 of them still go today. He's a phenomenal guy. But this is the piece he did in 1790, because he signed the Declaration. He ratified the Constitution. He served in 3 different presidential administrations. And what happened was he said, well, now that we've got a Constitution, we're a United States. We used to be 13 colonies. What are we going to have to be teaching in schools if we're going to remain a nation? What do our kids need to know if we're going to be a nation? And so that's what he taught on the mode of education proper and a republic. The new republic, the United States of America, that's why he's called the father of public schools under the Constitution. It's interesting to see what he said. It's exactly what the first Congress said. He said, the only foundation for a useful education in a republic is to be laid in religion. Without this, there can be no virtue, and without virtue, there can be no liberty, and liberty is the object in life of all republican governments. If our government's going to exist, it has to have self-governing people, which comes from virtue, which comes from religion, and that means if you're not promoting your religion, you can't have self-governing people, and we can't exist as a nation. Now, that's the philosophy of education we had. By the way, the very next year, March 10, 1791, he wrote a second piece. This piece, he gave a dozen reasons we would never take the Bible out of public schools in America. So here's this great educator that we never talk about anymore, and this is the position that he took. So that's where we had that. Gouverneur Morris is another founding father we won't recognize today. He's one of the guys that was, and just for, I'm going to pass him too, but just for time, I'm going to keep moving. So that was the first point, was to teach religion, morality, and knowledge. The second point, you'll recall, was that you wanted to teach thinking skills. Now, we did this in a very interesting way. This is one of the textbooks that we use for generations in America. It's called The improvement of the mind. Isaac Watts did this particular one, and this lasted for generations in America. We want to teach kids how to use their minds. One of the ways we taught them how to use their minds was through things like this. This is out of one of the Founding Fathers' works. He talked about what they did in school when he was at school. And it's interesting to see how many forensics they did in their classes. Now, I will admit that when I read this, I didn't know what in the heck he was talking about, because I've seen enough TV to know that forensics is what you do to a dead body after you find somebody murdered somewhere. So I didn't have a clue what forensics was, and it turns out forensics is a term from Latin. It's a 1650 term, and it means to learn the art of public argumentation. What we did was we taught kids to be able to argue their positions and argue against other positions, think it through. And the way they did it, go back to what he had here. Let's take this one right here. Whether the conduct of the patriots who destroyed the tea in Boston Harbor in 1773 is to be condemned. All right, we got the Boston Tea Party. Professor walks in the class, and I call him professor because that's what they called even the 12 and 13-year-old kids. They had teachers, they called them professors. Professor walks in, and he says, all right, the Boston Tea Party, 1773, should we condemn that as an act of civil disobedience and rebellion, or should we praise that as an act of patriotism? All right, you argue for it, you argue against it, go after it, let's see it. And the kids get about that much time to prepare for it. And they have to think, now wait a minute, I wanted to be on the other side because I believe the other side. Didn't matter what side you believed, you got to figure out how to put your argumentation together to make your side look strong, and you got to be able to identify the weaknesses in the other guy's logic and be able to tear them up. And then he reverses it and you go the other way. So you have to learn how to think. And notice there is not a right or wrong answer to this question. And that's why they chose them this way. You have to learn the art of thinking. You have to see what the weaknesses are, what the strengths are. Does that argument really hold water? No, I can poke. See, we don't do that anymore. We're very gullible today because we don't learn the art of public thinking. Here's another one. I associate with no one, I employ no one who's not of my party in religion and politics. You can have a great debate on that. There's not a right or wrong, but you can have a great debate on it. Same thing here. Is there less danger in believing too much or too little? Too dangerous to know too much? Which way do you go? And this one, is there more to be gained by or lost by New Translation Scripture for common use? So this is all about teaching us how to think. Now, what happens is that's exactly what the Bible tells us as well. And by the way, the Bible not only talks about thinking, learning to use our mind, it also tells us ways to teach that will retain our knowledge. Now, probably all of you have seen Proverbs 22:6. That Bible verse says that you train up a child in the way he should go when he's won't depart from it. We think that means, if you get a kid when he's really young, then when he's old, he'll still remember. No. If you look in the original language, to train up did not mean start them when they're young. Train up was translated as catechize. If you catechize a child in the way he should go, he'll never forget it. Catechism is a particular teaching method. It's one that we hate today. Oh, it's so boring. The kids get so bored with it. But it's interesting to see back in early America, we so believed this principle that look at our textbooks. See this? Here's a catechism of ancient history. Here's a catechism of agriculture, chemistry, and geology. Here's a catechism of American law. Here's a catechism of etymology, which is the study of insects, so a science catechism. Here's a catechism on the United States history. Here's a catechism on astronomy and science. Here's a catechism on the concept. We did everything in catechisms, and our retention level was so much higher because that's a teaching method that works, but that is so boring. Who wants that today? Well, guess what? It doesn't work the way it used to back then. So you take this, and what was so cool about this with catechizing was it taught you to answer questions. You asked questions, you had to answer those important questions of who, what, when, where, why, and how. In every subject, with every fact, you had to know all. Boy, that'll teach you to think. That'll teach you to feed yourself. You become a self-feeder at that point in time. You don't have to have somebody else to feed you. You can feed yourself with knowledge. And that's the way we raised our kids. Now, that was to teach thinking skills. The third part that we taught was to instill high expectations. Let me kind of take you through. Let me back up for a minute. I want to introduce you to one of my friends, Rabbi Daniel Lapin. He is a Jewish rabbi, considered one of the top 50 rabbis in the United States. He's a close friend. I call him regularly with Bible questions. I'm an ordained minister, but I call him with Bible questions because he knows so much more in so many areas. When I was called to testify at the U.S. Senate on global warming, I'm an expert on global warming. So when I'm called to testify at the U.S. Senate, I called Rabbi Lapin and said, Rabbi, here's what I'm going to talk about. Would you tell me what you think? And he said, well, let me remind you of a principle in Genesis 1 through 3. And he went back and told me the principle. I go, my gosh, why didn't I ever see that? And I changed my testimony all around because it's such a good principle. So he's really sharp. And he points out that when first time God ever revealed himself to man, the first time God ever spoke to man, he chose to do so in Hebrew. That was the language God chose to reveal himself to. And since that is God's language, is Hebrew, Rabbi Lappin points out that every word that is said in Hebrew has meaning, unlike English. Every word there has a significant meaning. And he says, and it's not only what's in Hebrew, it's what's not in Hebrew, because this is what came out of the mind of God. This is the language he spoke. He says, interesting that when you look at Hebrew, it is absolutely impossible to say the word coincidence. It doesn't exist in Hebrew. Now, why can't you say the word coincidence? Because it never crossed God's mind that was just lucky. Boy, that was lucky that worked out. You know, God didn't see that one coming, caught him by surprise. The fact that you cannot say the word coincidence in Hebrew, it's designed, it's planned. God orchestrates, God directs, God plans. You can make your plans, he'll direct your steps. All the Bible, see, that's significant stuff. I never knew that as a Christian. You can't say the word coincidence or lucky. It doesn't exist. Another word you can't say is you can't say the word retirement. It doesn't exist in Hebrew. God never had a time when he wanted you not to be productive. Remember, there was one guy in Luke that said, I've had it. I'm going to retire a while. And God says, you fool. If you're not going to be productive, I don't need you here anymore. God wanted us to be productive. Another word you cannot say in Hebrew is the word fair. Who cares whether it's fair? God's a lot more concerned about your responses than he is with what happened to Job was not fair. That wasn't the issue. God was looking to see what Job's character was and how Job's going to respond. What happened to Jesus wasn't fair, but that wasn't the issue. What happened to Joseph wasn't fair. That wasn't the issue. Is how do you respond to what happens to you? And so you can't even say the word. The other word you cannot say in Hebrew is the word adolescent. It doesn't exist. Because when you're a young person, you're supposed to be an adult as quick as you can be. I mean, you go from being a 12-year-old to being a 13-year-old, at which time you become an elder in the synagogue because you've memorized the entire book of Deuteronomy by the age of 13. So you're an elder in the synagogue. But see, we've got into this thing in the 20th century of having adolescence. We want you to stay and be immature and not be productive and enjoy yourself. And what we teach right now from the government standpoint is, kids, here's what will make you a perfect citizen. If you can go through high school and go on to college and get a degree in college, and maybe 4 or 5 years later you will have become mature enough to be productive in society, and if you will get a job where you can make money and contribute taxes, and if you will keep yourself from going to jail, if you'll not kill somebody, if you can become a taxpayer that doesn't cost us any money in jail, you're a perfect citizen. That's our expectation for our kids. That's as high as it goes. Now, what's interesting is, do you know, according to the U.S. government right now, what the age of adolescence is? How high it goes? Officially, the age of adolescence goes till you're 30 years old. That is the age of adolescence. So we work our tail off to make sure that you just have fun for 20 years and just take your time. You don't have to be productive. That's not high expectations. So instilling high expectations, I want to show you this adolescence thing, what we call adolescence. Let me show you where 5- and 6-year-old students were in America. The first textbook ever printed in America is the New England Primer, printed in 1690 by Benjamin Harrison, Boston. It was a reading textbook until 1930 in most states of the United States. It was for over 200 years, this is where kids learned to read. When they went to school, this is their first reading book. It's interesting that it starts out at the beginning with the letters of the alphabet, and you're reading words like this. A, in Adam's fall, we sinned all. B, heaven defined, the Bible mind. C, Christ crucified for sinners. Sounds like religious content. Yeah, religion, morality, knowledge. This is first grade stuff. So first graders are reading this content. Now this is considered words of 1, 2, and 3 syllables. Then they get to a section where they read words of 4, 5, and 6 syllables. They've gone through phonics. And after you get the words of 4, 5, and 6 syllables, here's the second memorized section of the book. It's called, let me get it right here. It's called The Alphabet of Lessons for Youth. A wise son makes a glad father, but a foolish son is the heaviness of his mother. B, better is a little with fear of the Lord, great treasure and terrible therewith. C, come unto Christ, all ye labor. For 240 years, that was our public school textbook from which we learned to read in America. First graders were reading this material. Now, what's fun is at the end of this first grade textbook, and they didn't call them grade levels back then because they didn't have graded schools, but when you got to school, this is where you started. So if you're 4 years old or 14 years old, this is your first year, you're going to be reading this book right here. At the end, they had 168 catechism questions, and they're just questions. And some of these questions for first graders, pretty interesting. They had 40 questions on the 10 Commandments. What's the fourth commandment? What's required in the fourth commandment? What's the reason annexed to the fourth commandment? What's forbidden in the fourth commandment? 40 questions on the 10 Commandments. They had questions on all sorts of others, and they also had questions on religious faith and belief. Let me show you this question here. See question number 36 here? Question. First grade kids, what are the benefits which in this life do accompany or flow from justification, adoption, and sanctification? Anybody want to give that a shot? We wish we taught that in seminary today. That was first grade for every kid in America back then. We've reprinted that old textbook, but just jumping ahead and still in high expectations. So going through all this, we came to a point in American history where we said, well, it's time to have a change. That change did occur. We said, no, religion, morality, knowledge, that's gone. The Supreme Court in 1962, in the case Ingo Vital, said no more prayer, no more Bible study. We want secular education. Then we also said, well, the thinking stuff, that's got to stop too. And the way we did that, progressive educators, particularly, and a lot of these guys you'll recognize, Progressive Education Association, but Ingersoll, Robert Ingersoll, really famous, and Parker and Ward, Kilpatrick, Dewey, all these guys said, what we need to do is change the emphasis of education. It has been about thinking, but it now needs to be about learning. We don't want to have our kids thinking anymore. We want them to be learners. We want our kids to be learners. Now, when you do that, when you change from thinking to learning, what you've done is you've taken the emphasis off the student and you've placed the emphasis on the teacher. Because when it was thinking, the kid can feed himself. When it's learning, somebody has to give him the stuff that he learns. And so now the teacher is the one that disseminates all the material, and because of that, it's the teacher that really confines the kids to what they know or don't know, and that's why testing has become so onerous now, high-stakes testing that's out there. So this thing of students and teachers and the way we did that, pretty significant. What happens is, in that period, when we changed from thinking to learning, we changed testing. That's when you first find fill-in-the-blank test. Ooh, that's really hard. And then you've got things like true and false. We'll give you 2 options. 3 options would be too many. No, we'll give you 3 options. We'll let you do multiple choice. Multiple choice, true and false, fill in the blank. That became the testing method for learning. Now, that's not what we did for thinking. You saw what we did for thinking. We had forensics. You'd stand in front of class and go after it, debate somebody for an hour. It's a whole different thing now. So we changed that. And what happens is when you go from thinking to learning, we said we didn't want the thinking part anymore. We just want the learning. Well, now you're a receiver of information. Whatever you're told, that's what you remember. That's what you have to spit back on the test, is what you've been told, what you've received as a learner. And that makes you very gullible. Gullible is a real problem. Matter of fact, that's where indoctrination comes from. We believe anything we've been told. And I saw it on the internet, and that's where I got it. I hit that all the time. Well, I saw all these articles, Founding Fathers, a bunch of atheist, agnostics, deists. Here's a great one. This one, I love this one. The Jefferson Bible. Do you know the Jefferson Bible? Thomas Jefferson cut out all the miracles. He took all the stuff he didn't like and cut it out. Everybody who's asked me that, I said, have you ever read the Jefferson Bible yourself? No. Well, how do you know it cut out the miracles? Well, everybody says so. Well, it's a strange thing. If you read that Bible, you see that Jesus raised the dead. He healed the sick. He cast out demons. It talks about heaven and hell and angels and the resurrection. But they told me it wasn't in there. But you're not thinking, you're just learning. You're learning what everyone else said. And that's why we become so gullible and so indoctrinated in so many areas. So lots of stuff to go through. I want to get to the end of this. Forgive me for a little bit here. I'm going to skip to the end so we can close this thing down because we've got a panel and I've gone nearly my hour that I was going to go. So forgive me for jumping ahead. Get right down to the end here. I want to show you what we had when we did education differently. I'm going to take you real quickly through this, and then I'll close out my part. So we got rid of this thing of having high expectations. We don't want to do that anymore, and so high expectations go away. I want to take you back to what the product was when we had things like religion, morality, and knowledge, and we had things like thinking, and we had things like high expectations. Let me take you to show you what that was like, because it's not where we are today. I'll take you to Fisher Ames. Fisher Ames is the founding father. This is one of the framers of the Bill of Rights. He gave us the First Amendment of the Constitution. He's the guy who gave us the House language. Fisher Ames, when he was 12 years old, entered Harvard University. Now, don't be impressed yet, because you need to know that to go to university back then, you had to be trilingual. You had to be fluent in Latin and Greek and English. You were fluent in Latin because everybody read the classics. You read Homer and Cicero and Plutarch and all the classics. English is obvious. Why Greek? Because every freshman in America was given a Greek copy of the New Testament, had to make a handwritten copy of the Greek New Testament in English. Now, he's 12 years old. Don't be impressed, because the average age at which a student went to university in America back then was 13 years old. So he's only a little bit smarter than everybody else in the country. Again, we had high expectations at 13. You're trilingual. At 13, a kid can translate. Yeah, absolutely. And Benjamin Rush, I mentioned to you earlier, he's also called the father of American medicine. He's the guy who founded the American College of Physicians. We have several medical discoveries that he gave us that we still use today. Great physician. 3,000 medical students got their diploma with his signature on it. This guy graduated from Princeton when he was 14 years old. Now, anybody particularly comfortable going to a 14-year-old doctor today? Yeah, that was a top doctor in America back then. You have folks like John Trumbull, who was a justice on the Supreme Court of Connecticut. He's also a literary figure. He did a lot of literature works that we still study in advanced literature, or we used to study before Common Core, his works. John Trumbull, interestingly, when he was 4 years old, had finished reading the King James Bible through from cover to cover for the first time at the age of 4. And that was pretty typical. Founding fathers like John Witherspoon, signer of the Declaration, did the same thing. When he was 4, he'd already read through the Bible. Well, John Trumbull, when he was 6.5 years old, when he was 6 years old, he beat his minister in a Greek contest. When he was 7.5 years old, he passed the entrance exam to Yale University. Now, his parents held him out and said, "That's a little young, we'll hold you out till you're older." They held him out till he was 13, because that's when all the peers went to school. Then you have folks like James Iredell, put on the U.S. Supreme Court by George Washington. James Iredell ratified the Constitution. James Iredell, when he was 17 years old, was the chief financial officer in his part of North Carolina, ran all the public finances for the state in that part of the state. 17 years old. You got the chief economic officer being 17? Absolutely. And then you have folks like Andrew Jackson. When he was 13 years old, he was already a prisoner of war in the American Revolution. He had been a soldier for a long time before that. Already 13 years old, prisoner of war. We wouldn't think about something like that today. A couple more quick ones. Maria Mitchell. Maria Mitchell is the first woman in America to discover a comet. She found that comet and started an observatory. She trained women for science. This is the telescope that she built, really cool telescope that she has there. And Maria Mitchell, interesting, science person that she was, when she was 11 years old, she was a teaching assistant in astronomy at the age of 11. When she was 12 years old, she calculated the time of a forthcoming solar eclipse. Now remember, that's all by longhand, no computers of any kind. So she predicted that 2.5 years from now, 3:43 in the afternoon, just by her own math at 12 years old, predicted the time of a forthcoming solar eclipse. She also, when she was 17 years old, was running her own school in math and science. That's America. Then you have the Pony Express. I am a cowboy. I own a ranch in Texas. I still ride horses. We're, the cows and horses and all this stuff. I love these guys. Pony Express. Look at the recruiting poster. Pony Express, St. Joe, Missouri to California in 10 days or less. See that? Now, here's the route. That's from St. Joe, Missouri to California, 10 days. That's 1,800 miles in 10 days. If I ride a horse 40 miles a day, I've worn the horse out, I've worn me out. We were riding 180 miles a day on average in the Pony Express. Now, the Pony Express, here they are. What's significant about the Pony Express, one of the most, and let me show you the rest of the Pony Express poster. All right, see that? St. Joe, Missouri to California in 10 days or less. Wanted, young, skinny, wiry fellows. Not over 18. Must be expert riders willing to risk death daily. Orphans preferred. $25 a week. Not over 18. One of the most famous Pony Express riders was a guy named Bronco Charlie. He was 11 years old. 11 years old? Wait a minute. You're making that trip from St. Joe to San Francisco. You're 11 years old, going 180 miles a day, and you're having to shoot outlaws, and you're having to swim rivers, and you're having to survive hailstorms and tornadoes. 11 years old? Yeah, but see, he was experienced. He was a professional bronc buster when he was 8 years old. Now, I go to rodeos. I haven't seen an 8-year-old professional bronc buster in my lifetime. That's what we had back then. The expectations were so different. It's not that kids can't do them. It's we don't expect them to do anything anymore. We don't expect anything from them. So another example, John Clem. He was in the Civil War. He's the hero of the Battle of Chickamauga. He's out of Indiana, and the Indiana Register newspaper kept up with their local heroes. And this is what they said, 1864. It said, John, nicknamed Little John Clem, in the Army of the Cumberland, promoted for bravery by General Rosecrans to sergeancy, has been further promoted by General Thomas to lieutenancy and placed on staff. For bravery in the field at Chickamauga, they made him a sergeant. Then General Thomas said, no, I need you on my staff as lieutenant. So he gets two promotions. And by the way, this is John Clem. He's but 12 years old. See that? This is Sergeant John Clem right there. That's when General Thomas reached down and said, no, I need you as a lieutenant to run my staff. 12 years old, hero of the Battle of Chickamauga, and he's a lieutenant on the general staff at 12 years old? See, that's the kind of stuff we had back then. And just in case you think I'm picking the exceptions and not the rule, I'll close tonight by showing you old textbooks. You need to remember that until about 1920, nobody went to school past 8th grade in America. You graduated at 8th grade. And if you want a lot of fun, go on the web and take the exit exam, the 8th grade exit exam, because that's your last year of school. Take it for California in 1925. Take it for Oklahoma in 1907. Take it for Colorado in 1920. Take it for Nebraska in 1915. They're all on the web. You see what typical 8th grade knowledge was back then in the old days. Let me take you, for example, to spelling. This is an elementary spelling book from 1782 to 1932. If you learned to spell in America, it was out of Webster's Blueback Speller. This is your beginning spelling book. A look at beginning spelling words for every kid in America for 150 years. I will not even attempt to pronounce some of those words because I don't have a clue what they mean. And yet that was elementary for every kid. This is not just elite kids. This is every kid in America for 150 years. Let me take you into geography. Here's the geography test in Chicago, 1862, March the 27th, 1862. You get 35 minutes for this test, 4th grade. Here's 4th grade questions in public school. This is standard geography test. How many degrees of longitude are there? How many degrees wide are the temperate zones? Name the principal animals of the frigid zone. What portion of the people on the globe are pagans? What portion Christians? 4th grade? Want to give it a shot? And then let's try some 6th grade math. Ray's arithmetic, 1862, 6th grade math. Let's do this. Here's a question. I insure 2/3 of a shop worth $3,600 and 4/5 of the house worth $6,000, paying $126. What was the rate of insurance? Want to take a shot at that, 6th grader? I've taught math and science. I was a school principal and math and science teacher. I couldn't do that off the top of my head, but they did. That's a 6th grade math problem. Here's another one. How many $50 shares at 8% discount must be given for 23 bonds, $100 each at 2% premium? A 6th grade math problem all over America. And we'll finish up with some mental math here, some arithmetic. You're not allowed to use paper on this. They call these mental math books. This is for 6th grade also. These are problems you have to solve in your head because we do teach you to think, right? That's what we're teaching is thinking. Hey, let's try some mental math problems from 1877. A boat worth $864, of which 1/8 belonged to A, 1/4 to B, and the rest to C was lost. What loss did each sustain it having been insured for $500? In your head. Here's another head problem. If 6 men can do a piece of work in 5 days, in what time can they do it if they receive the assistance of 3 additional men when the work is half completed? 6th grade. See, that's why in talking about Common Core literally is putting lipstick on a pig. If you don't get back to the principles that deal with thinking, that deal with high expectations, and deal with religion, morality, and knowledge, it's not going to work. So there's a lot of reasons to oppose Common Core. Again, that website, Halt Common Core, will give you more information than you can possibly use. It links you to groups all over the nation that are fighting Common Core, gives you the collective brain of all of them, and it's got to be stopped. I mean, it's a bad deal for our kids, but we've got to remember what principles are. We've got to go back to basic training. We've got to go back to spring training and get back to the basics if this thing's going to work right. Thank you guys for letting me share with you. God bless.
David, if I didn't know better, I would say this isn't fair. But now that I've learned Hebrew, I can't do that. Let's ask our panel to come up. And remember as you leave tonight to turn in your envelopes with your contact information. I'm sure you didn't get down all the facts today that have been shared. If you'd like to get them later, we'll make that video available to you. And as our panel comes up, and we're going to have them introduce themselves and share a little their thoughts on Common Core, and then we're going to open the rest of the evening to questions that you have, questions that you maybe haven't heard answered yet tonight, and we'll get them answered before you leave. As they start sharing, if you have questions, I'd ask that you would come up and get in line in front of that microphone or this microphone so that we'll all be able to hear you. And I just have a couple simple rules to make us all learners and are thinkers and not learners. I'll get it right. since we may have a lot of questions that we want to get answered, I would ask that you just come up, share your name, and if you represent any group, feel free to say that. But we'd ask that you not give any speeches. Just get right to the questions so that our panelists can answer them. You can direct the question to a specific individual on the panel or just in general, and that they can all take a stab at it. So if you'll start by introducing yourself, Andy.
Great. Thanks, Finn. Andy Thompson. I'm a state representative from Marietta, Ohio, and serve in the Ohio legislature since 2011. And I'm very interested in the Common Core issue. I've had first got started because a teacher in my district expressed concern about it, and I looked into things and didn't get the answers that I wanted, and did some further exploration and learned a lot more about how Common Core was not what we wanted for Ohio. With the help of some capable folks, I guess it was at the American Principles Project and elsewhere, we put together a bill to stop Common Core in Ohio. That is House Bill 237, and you can find it if you go to the ohiohouse.org, ohiohouse.gov website, and you can find information about that. There is a substitute bill. I don't want to be too technical, but we have changed the bill slightly to improve it, particularly regarding data mining issues. And so be glad to provide more information on that if you'd like to get in touch with my office. Also, Ohioans Against Common Core, if you weren't aware of that, ohioansagainstcommoncore.com has a lot of good information. And we hope to enlist your help and support and interest in this topic. If you're just getting started, I think David Barton did a wonderful presentation. Tough act to follow. And some of the knowledge that I gained on Common Core was in an event that we did down in Texas, kind of a nationwide brainstorming session that we did courtesy of David Barton. And so I want to thank him again for that. And as he was showing the video, I had some brief FaceTime there, so it was nice to be part of that. But again, encourage you to continue to educate yourselves and then get involved, because this is something that we can't change Ohio unless the grassroots makes it happen. Yeah. We have, I would say some of my fellow legislators who aren't as anxious to act as some of us are. And I think I had 13 co-sponsors on my bill, so that gives you a flavor. We have certain people who are interested and supportive of it, but still probably aren't as educated as they need to be. And those of you in the audience who are in touch with your state representative, if you are, continue to, and if you aren't, please do. That can help us get the right conclusion in Ohio.
Good evening. My name is Heidi Huber. I began Ohioans Against Common Core back in February of 2013. I have been a part of the liberty movement at its start, actually my first major event being 9/12 in DC with Glenn Beck. And from that point forward, all of my liberty focus has been on education policy. It is my belief that that is where liberty lies. It either thrives or dies in the classroom. And that the liberty movement is a static movement until we get into the classroom and teach our children the values of our country, what self-determination means, and that their personal responsibilities precede their personal rights, individual rights rather. I came across Common Core in my profession. I'm a finance manager at a K-12 Christian academy in Cincinnati. And again, for 3 years, I had the pulse on education policy in Ohio, particularly on school choice. When I saw Common Core materials and that things leaning towards that, I couldn't figure out what it was, but it looked really bad. It took about 10 minutes of looking into it to realize this went way beyond the autonomy and mission concerns I had for our academy, and this was going to fundamentally change every classroom in the country and ultimately affect our country and our liberty and our fate. I contacted, my first point of contact was to our state board president, who happens to be my representative on the state education board. I got nowhere, very political answers. It was very obvious that that was not going to be a path towards repeal. We put together 3 statewide forums within 24 hours in the month of April last year to kick off our statewide effort. Michelle Mattina, who's with us this evening, arranged the Cleveland very successful event. We drew over 1,000 people in that 24-hour period, most knowing nothing about Common Core except just the little bit that was starting to get out, and it was so dark and so evil from the get-go. From that point, I started making legislator visits, and fortunately, Representative Thompson was the only legislator that I talked to that knew what Common Core was, again, because of a constituent approaching him first. And from that point forward, within 90 days of our first forum, we had a comprehensive full repeal bill that was introduced in the Ohio House. Unfortunately, the powers that be and the political forces in Ohio, while they should be very, very hungry for this, considering we have the type of political ground game that we do in terms of Republicans in every state executive office, practically a supermajority in our General Assembly, we have been met with complete resistance at every Republican leadership level. Our bill, House Bill 237, is tabled currently in the House Education Committee, and it is our desire to move it out of committee. We are having a rally next Wednesday in the State House atrium. We would love for you to join us. The more bodies, the better. It runs from 11 o'clock on Wednesday the 4th till about 1. The idea is there are going to be some announcements that day, particularly one about House Bill 237, an update on it. We are also going to have Jenny White, who is the leader of the Oklahoma full repeal bill that just made it through their General Assembly, and we are waiting for Governor Fallin to sign that. It is I believe, the most comprehensive repeal bill in the country, and they have moved that through their legislature. It's phenomenal what they have done. She was going to join us on Wednesday as a boost in the arm, but also we are going to align forces with Oklahoma, because Oklahoma is extremely important, because Mary Fallin, their governor, is the president or the chairman of the National Governors Association. Well, we share a distinction too, because Ohio is the state in a national election. We are the bellwether state. So it's equally important, and again, we have the landscape that we should be able to pass a repeal bill, and so we're going to get it done. So please join us next Wednesday.
Hello, I'm Yvonne Trotter, and currently I am a teacher at Geneva College, a small Christian college in Beaver Falls, Pennsylvania. But before that, I was a public school teacher in a city in East Liverpool, where I taught both regular and special education classes at the elementary, middle school, and high school level, as well as ending my career in the public schools as an elementary principal. So when approaching the topic of Common Core, what has concerned me, other than the fact that, according to the Constitution, it's a state issue, not a federal one, is the apathetic compliance of most of the people involved. And the mandate is just being accepted by everyone without research, without questioning, without investigation, without any dialogue. And my question constantly is, have we become so used to being asked to conform to demands that we have forgotten how to question, or have we given up? And the scripture that continually comes to my mind is from 1 Chronicles 12:32. And this scripture verse talks about the men of Issachar. And what was so defining about them was the fact that they understood the times and they knew what to do in that time. So basically, I think what we need here are men and women who truly take the time to delve into this issue, to become educated in what's happening around the world, and especially in the United States, and have an understanding of what is going on here with the Common Core curriculum, and looking at it through the whole picture, and then asking what's going on here. And basically from that, I think that we have to ask ourselves the question, what can we do in order to stop it?
Fantastic. Why don't you start making your way up front? If you have any questions, either of those mics, just move on up front so that we can start. And again, introduce yourself. If you're representing a group, certainly feel free to share that and then go right to the question.
I am Patty Gascoigne-Teleshak, a candidate for state representative. District 15 is Parma, where Common Core is being implemented, and lots of money has been spent in that school district on the little electronics, lots of money. Now, say Common Core is repealed in Ohio, please God, the residuals that are already in the school system, the materials that have already been purchased, the plans that have already been laid by the different school boards, when is there going to be a timeline laid out when the continuation of this program is supposed to be stopped by, or a buyback program for all these electronics? Maybe that's up to the local schools. I mean, once it stopped, I mean, the balls kind of started rolling down the hill. And I've spoken to our school board president, and he's unresponsive. He didn't want to hear that there's three federal laws that this whole thing violates. I just wanted to hear your thoughts on that. So if the state no longer has a commitment to this Common Core state standards, are the schools even obligated to the federal government at all for that little stripe of money they get, if you look on a graph? Thank you.
Fantastic. So I think, in short, what you're saying is, if it stops, then what? Anyone want to take that?
Well, I'll comment on that. I mean, I think that's something that concerns us. I mean, the program itself concerns us. I think the notion is the state would have to have some response financially to help alleviate the concerns that districts who've gone forward and have invested in this. One of the concerns we had was all the federal dollars that had come in, were we going to have to send those federal dollars back? I think it's kind of unclear. I think about half of the 200 of the 400 million has been already spent in Ohio and appropriated, and the other 200 has been appropriated, but I don't know that it's been spent yet. So again, these are questions that we need to answer. I appreciate the concern. But you know, many people have said we're so far down this track, we've gone, we can't turn back now. I still think if you see the falls coming at Niagara, you pedal in the other direction. If you don't, you need to stop this first. First thing we need to do is stop it. I think the response of the people who are proponents of it is always asking us to defend things, asking us for more answers. And if you got an answer to that, they've got another question for you. I think they're the ones that need to answer the questions. They need to answer why we're in this, and we need to get out of this. And I think if we can get out of this, I think then folks in Ohio will rally and they'll appreciate what we're doing, and the legislature will respond accordingly. Obviously, we didn't have, when we got into Common Core, it was a desperate financial situation for the state, and the federal government knew that. And so they were able to induce Ohio with the carrot of money and also the incentive of getting out of No Child Left Behind, which was the last terrible federal program that we were living under. So we're going to have to formulate a response to that. But the first thing I need to do is persuade my fellow legislators who should know better that we need to get Common Core out of the schools, and then we'll worry about the problems down the road.
Let me add something here. There we go. Let me add to something Andy said, and part of it is the mentality of money, not just on Common Core, but let me address it real quickly on a different aspect. The money aspect is the carrot on the end of the stick. That's what gets folks into all sorts of things. And they'll go after money, go after money, go after money. And they always want more money, but don't analyze whether it's even being used well. Here's a couple of examples. I was talking to a U.S. congressman who said that right now, most school districts get around 6-8%, single digit, most school districts, is the amount of money they get from federal government. In other words, their portion of the money they receive, only about 6% comes from the federal government. 47% of their paperwork comes from the federal government. Just the folks they have to hire to keep up with the paperwork wipes out the 6% they get of the federal government strings. So there has been a movement in several states for schools to say, I don't want the federal funds, and guess what? They get rid of a bunch of staff they didn't need, and they're right back where they were without the federal strings attached. The second thing that goes with that is it has reshaped the way we teach our schools. In Texas, we had a bill called Dollars to the Classroom Act, where we said in Texas, 65 cents out of every dollar appropriated for education is going to be spent in the classroom. We want it spent in the classroom. Sounds good? We couldn't get the bill passed. It turned out that we found out that in our largest schools, in San Antonio and Houston and Dallas and et cetera, that the ratio of administrators to teachers was a 1-to-1 ratio. Every teacher had one administrator. So we obviously couldn't get 65 cents out of the dollar in the classroom if it was a 1-to-1 ratio, and that's again that bureaucracy that exists because they take money and then have to manage the money and so some of it is just, hey, let's back up and let's go back to simplistic things and let's not take all the micromanagement strings that comes, and then we don't have the compliance stuff that work with, and it's a whole lot cheaper to do it when you don't have to worry about the compliance. So that's an overview different from Common Core, but that's the mentality that drives the Common Core is they want that money. They always want more money, but they always get strings with it, and it's harder on them than when they didn't have it.
And again, back to the money issue, and you do find this in education. I've been on the House Education Committee since I got to the House. The talk is always about money and systems. Very rarely does the word child come up. That's right. Yeah. And if you think about it, that's the way it's always been driven. We've got to pass a new levy, we need more money, we need to build a new building. I'm not really worried, I should say I'm not worried, but I'm concerned about the building, but I'm more concerned about what goes on in the building. And in some ways, as we look back at our history, we see that the one-room schoolhouses, their performance has never been surpassed. So it wasn't a building, it wasn't a smart board that educated kids. It was an excellent teacher who was passionate and loved what they did. And I think we're taking even more of the passion and the rewards out of teaching now with a system like this where you plop a kid in front of a computer. You don't even need a teacher, they're just administrators now. They're just hall monitors or study hall, so it is changing fundamentally. I always hear about fundamental transformations. We are fundamentally transforming education in a very detrimental way.
Yes, sir. You're on.
You're on.
Okay.
It should be on. You don't have to you don't have to flick anything, just go ahead and talk.
Use your outside voice.
Yeah.
Project.
Use your outside voice.
Thank you. My name is Joe Sherry, and I had two questions. One of them, the young lady addressed already. I was concerned with how does Ohio get rid of Common Core when they already accepted the grant money from Race to the Top. The second question is, what nexus did the previous administration in Ohio use to think that we didn't have a 10th Amendment? They should have never allowed that to happen in the first place. Is there some nexus there that we don't know about?
Well, first, unfortunately, coming back to the word apathetic, it was funny but heartbreaking. One of the first presentations I did was actually over in Marietta last June, and there were 5 legislators there. They were all from West Virginia because it's right there on the east border. But the first question asked was, besides it being unconstitutional, what's wrong with it? Now, that would have taken your breath away coming from anyone. But coming from a legislator, it was especially heartbreaking to think, they just don't get it. And so from the idea that this violated the 10th Amendment, when Governor Strickland signed us on and Governor Kasich followed up and reaffirmed that he would, abide by the assurances promised in the grant, that really is meaningless up in Columbus. I was met with that when I first started making visits. You got to come up with something better than it's illegal, because no one cares about the Constitution up here. There's never been a cost projection. Nobody cares about how we're going to pay for it. Got to come up with something better than that. That's what because we've allowed ourselves to become so apathetic and no one's been watching the gate, that's what you're dealing with. So to try and fight it strictly on a 10th Amendment issue, quite honestly, it doesn't resonate because people have been so dumbed down, they don't even know what you're talking about when you say the 10th Amendment. But in regards to this idea about the Race to the Top grant, that money, there's nothing, so to speak, in the grant that talks about having to give money back. The only possibility is that the $200 million that has not been physically received would no longer come to Ohio. That does not concern me, particularly in the year of 2014, because again, Ohio is way too important for the federal government to say they're not going to give Ohioans $200 million that they promised they would give them. Because for all intent and purposes, we did abide by the grant. We did what they asked us to do. The other part that I think needs to be called out, and Governor Kasich needs to address, his continuing growing budget. This past budget has $250 million carved out and set aside, brand new appropriation. I call it the Common Core Slush Fund. It's called the Straight A Fund. But they've taken the path of the feds, and the local superintendents apply for grants to their own state Department of Ed, And if their grant is, I would say, probably Common Core aligned and needed, then they will get their appropriation. The governing board of that $250 million are all four huge supporters of Common Core, our House and Senate education chairs, our vice chair of the House Ed, and our state superintendent. So that was their way to get around the concerns of the local districts of like, I can't afford to go buy iPads for my kindergartners. Well, just file for a grant from the Straight A Fund. Because I can guarantee you that as long as that is going to further entrench Common Core, you're going to get your money. And so a superintendent's going to do that because a superintendent's the CEO of that district. His concern, quite honestly, is not about anything except what grade Columbus is going to give him for his district and how much money he's going to get. So that's the problem, too. Again, like Andy said, student, parent, we really are not a part of the conversation. It's all about, the tail wagging the dog and who's going to get what out of it and where they're going to stand by the time the next election comes around.
Fantastic. You want to bring next question, please?
I'm Dawn. I homeschool my daughter, and so I'm very concerned about what's going to happen to her. She's only 9. I know they're talking way off about college, but sorry. I start thinking about that now for college for her, but the other thing that really just kind of blew my mind when you're talking about 11 and 12-year-olds, what curriculum are they following? Where do I find all of those things? Because I learned in school, and I'm finding I didn't really learn anything. So on your site, is there a place where I can even go to look for some of those things to start educating her with those now?
Are you saying you're looking for a curriculum to align to prepare her for the aligned SAT?
No, I want to know what's going to happen to the homeschoolers right now as it stands. I don't conform to Common Core at all. We don't use any of that curriculum. So what happens to her? Does this mean she's automatically shut out? Does this mean like when they're doling out which job you can get, that means she can be the garbage collector?
Well, there's already been news stories in terms of discrimination against homeschooled students for employment, and as we know, the SAT is now being aligned to the Common Core. And that alone tells you that this is an agenda, because the SAT is a reasoning test. It's a cognitive test. There would be no reason at all to adjust an SAT in its pure form to a set of standards. If in fact you believed in your standards and this was not nefarious, you would step back, wanting to be able to have data to compare, and you would sit back and say, see, we told you so. See those numbers going up? See, the Common Core works. Okay. But they didn't. They had aligned the SAT for a number of reasons. One, so that they could get the curriculum and the children to be taught to it, but secondly, to coerce in the homeschoolers. Because now there's a way for them, again, here's another stick.
To push them back.
What I have called for is, I don't understand why, and David may know some history on this, why is there not a Christian college entrance exam? Or quite honestly, a Catholic, because they own 80% of private education, K through 12, and they have dozens of higher ed institutions. We do not have to be enslaved by the SAT, the College Board. I don't understand that.
And let me add to that in the sense that also the thing that you want to do is you want to recognize that you've got your daughter now. It's going to be some years before she gets there. In the meantime, you just teach her the most rigorous stuff you can, and you make her just as competent as she can be, because what invariably happens with this stuff is these folks will invariably put themselves as a laughing stock. We finally had to reform education in Texas because there was a time when all 50 states used the same standardized test so we could compare one another. Well, that got to be a lot of pressure. If Texas said we were 47th in education, then all of our guys got beat up, and so now every state does its own state assessment of some type. And so you can't say Ohio's third in the nation, Montana's 24th. It doesn't. You can't do that anymore. And so as a result, in Texas, what we had was our state education agency came up with what we call superior schools and exceptional schools, superior schools, good schools, fair school, and bad schools. And exceptional school meant that 40% of your kids could read at 60% of grade level. Wait a minute, that's exceptional? That's a D in anybody. But see, since only Texas had that standard, we could say we're really exceptional. And now everybody laughs when they see I'm an exceptional school in Texas, you know, they put the banner up, everybody laughs at it because they know it doesn't mean anything. That's what will happen with SAT if they don't get back on it, because what they have told the business guys, and this is why Chamber of Commerce is into this, the business guys have been told that this will give you job-ready kids who are competent. Right now, schools are so bad that you talk to any university professor, 80% of university professors and presidents will tell you that the first 2 years of college are nothing but remedial education for what should have been learned in high school. And so the college guys already know that what's coming out of high school is bad. The business guys know, and then when they get the new crop of business kids out with Common Core, where it's so much lower than it is, suddenly business is not going to be on board. And they're the ones really driving the Republican train on this, just business and big donors and Chamber of Commerce and those kind of guys. So in your case, ignore what's going to happen, because they're going to be laughing about it at how dumb it is in a few years, because the results are already coming in that way. And that's why legislatures are changing. Last year, Oklahoma had no chance of getting Common Core revoked. And this year, they slammed it, their repeal. And that's because of the change they've seen. So don't get discouraged, but definitely don't worry about your daughter. You just teach her, and teach her really, really well. Be rigorous with her, and she's going to be great.
And I'd like to make one comment.
And I know we've got a lot of questions, but I really do think Common Core is really the death of school choice in Ohio. It's the death of, it's really devastating to homeschoolers, certainly. I spoke to a group of homeschoolers in Columbus, and I think they're figuring it out now, but it took a long time. And it's taken a long time for the Christian community to understand what a threat it is to faith and everything else. So we're continuing to make that case, but we need the grassroots. I think in Columbus, they're a little nervous right now because we've been through a primary election and it had an impact on the primaries. We're going to go to a general election now. I think we need to, again, continue to make the voices heard, and it's making a difference. We're not there yet. And then we've also got the corporate component where the business roundtable's all over this and saying it's a wonderful thing. And the governor's very close to the business roundtable because they always support him on his tax increases. So we have to be careful about that and have to rally and be well informed. And then hopefully we can make a difference.
Okay, and one comment. You were asking what curriculum to look into. Look into classical curriculum, specifically classical Christian curriculum, and a good resource is the Veritas Press.
Which is classical and Charlotte Mason combined.
Very good. And if you're using that, they're going to be prepared.
Thank you.
More so
Makes
than
me
with
feel
the Common
better.
Core.
I wasn't sure if that was is Hillsdale affiliated with that?
I don't know.
I do have the woman who runs my campaigns has started a classical school in Marietta, Ohio, and she calls it Veritas Academy, and she's worked very closely with Hillsdale College, so that'd be a great source for those of you who want to find good information.
Yeah, one of the table resource people outside, you'll find a place that says Nathan Hale Academy. It's a one-room schoolhouse that's being created right here in Ohio to bring some of those things right there. If that sounds interesting to you, you may want to check at the table over in that corner. Yes.
My name is Joan Neal, and I want to commend you people for your interest in this, and especially the speaker, and for all the homework you've done. And I really appreciate it, and I thank you for it. I've been studying Common Core for quite a while, and I've been trying to spread the word. But I am finding that most Americans are very in the dark over what's going on in the schools, the majority. They just don't know. And it's like an octopus. It's got a lot of tentacles, and it's very deadly for our children. It's very serious, and we need to wake up. I have a son that's in administration in the mathematical departments in one of the biggest universities here in Ohio. And so I am extremely interested in what's going on, and I do my homework. And you know, this was addressed very well tonight, but it was all on the education end of it. And I am also concerned as a Christian about the other end of this, and that's the spiritual end, because if we don't get that under control, we're going to lose the educational anyway. And so I'm here to ask more about what's going on here with the political examples that are being given in there that are not national, that are international. And I think you know what I'm talking about, that they're training our children for other ethnic things. Mm-hmm. And also the immorality is running wild. Parents don't know where it's coming from. It's coming from school, and it has been for quite a while. It began with the humanism in the schools, which is the religion of atheists. It was written into law that way, and humanism, which is taught at all the schools today, is from the Humanistic Manifesto by Karl Marx. It's Marxism. And that was quite a while back when my children were younger. Now we're getting more things on the other religions and all that. But the immorality end of it is blatant. They're putting it up on the blackboards, and they're telling the children to do things that are so immoral and disgusting, and they don't tell the parents. But some parents are waking up. I'd like to address that at that end of things. How about that, those things that are going on, and the parents being taken away as the authority over the children? Thank you.
As you ponder that question, I think it needs to be said real clearly that you need to understand that we also that there are hundreds of thousands of fabulous educators out in our public, private school, and also homeschooling that are victims of this, that are not necessarily perpetrators of it. So as you leave today, let's be sure to support those educators that are out there. Realize they're victims of Common Core, not perpetrators. Any response to these questions?
Okay, I was just going to your point about teachers, and I'm the husband of a public school teacher, and she's it's come into the school with student learning objectives and all the Common Core objectives, and so I recognize that. My grandma taught for 37 years. My mom was a substitute teacher. My wife was a Spanish teacher. So we do applaud the work that teachers do. Often, it's a very trying job, and my wife just had her last day of school today, and she was so relieved that the school year had ended. Now she's going on a Spanish trip. So, but in any event, no, we do need to support our teachers, and we want to encourage those teachers. And I think that's part of what we're challenging here is what Common Core is doing to teaching. If you like what you do, if you're passionate about what you do, this takes all the joy out of what you are doing, because it's going to be like this educating from afar to standards that we don't own in Ohio. They're owned elsewhere and copyrighted and owned by Achieve Inc. And the testing is coming from elsewhere also, and it's mandated, and the data mining that David discussed is very, very real. I think teachers are starting to rebel against it. The teachers' unions got a lot of money to endorse Common Core, I think $4 million each, if not more than that. And they're starting to revisit that because they're not where their members are. Their members don't like Common Core. Their members are very disgusted with Common Core. So I think, again, eliminating Common Core has a lot of benefits. One of them would be to allow us to re-examine what is being taught in schools, to help teachers better employ the tools that they have and to have better content with which to do it. And so this is a healthy conversation which has happened all too infrequently in the last 30 years.
Something that history has told us is the government is a reflection of our culture. And again, it's an abdication of responsibility. Our classrooms aren't going to change until parents pull back and reclaim their children from the state.
That's right.
That is your responsibility.
That's right.
Quite honestly, it's your God-given duty to get in there, get your kids, reclaim their classroom, reclaim authority over your child.
That's right.
A teacher, a superintendent, a school board member. You are the expert on your child. You do not need a master's in education to know what's best for your child. You don't need to be an attorney to know they're breaking the law. Save your children. It's your responsibility. Right. This is basic, fundamental principle, and we need to walk it out.
That's right.
And we don't have to be a majority. Okay, it takes that first parent. I've watched it across the state in presentations. People will stand up. And this is such a different movement than anything else politically, which is the other reason Columbus can't get their hands around it. These moms just won't go away. And we know far more than they do. Okay, we know bogus legislation when we've seen it. We have 5 bills right now that are bogus legislation about addressing Common Core. But the reason for that is because I go to presentations and there'll be people to come up to me in tears. Well, I want to get this up. Who's your legislator? I don't know. You don't know who your state rep is? Okay, well, that's your first homework assignment.
That's right.
Go home, find out who is elected to represent you. Take back your classroom, take back your child, and take back your country ultimately. That's where it happens.
Vince?
We really need to honor your time here tonight. We really can't take any more formal questions, but if the panel could stay up here for a little longer, if some of you want to come up and ask the questions, we can do that. Again, if you want to join Christian Educators Association International and blessing David Barton and Wall Builders with a donation, please. As we will have staff members in back with baskets that you can drop in the cards for both your registration and your donation. There are some great resources back on the tables that I hope you will look at and ponder and see if there's anything you can use. And if one of the things, if I could summarize what I have learned tonight, it's that we've got a problem with Common Core, and we need to do something about it. We're a representative government. We need to talk to our representative. If you're connected with a public school, we are the public. And we need to speak out. But again, I would say keep in mind that your local school districts are really a victim of this and not the perpetrators. So if you're going to be approaching your local schools, see how you can support them. We get calls continually from teachers who will say to us, I can't do this. Do I really have to teach this stuff? Well, yeah, as long as you're under contract with your district, you must teach the curriculum that they have adopted. So many of the teachers and also administrators, in fact, I know there are some of Ohio's best teachers and administrators in here tonight, and I know they feel like victims also. So let's speak up. Those of you who have given us your email addresses, we'll give you a link to the video of tonight's program. I hope you share it with people, and let's get involved. It's our country. You know, I'd like to close in an unusual way today, if you don't mind. In classrooms across the nation, school was started with a Pledge of Allegiance. Would you join me in closing tonight with a Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance Amen. That's right. Good night. God bless you. God bless your children. God bless the United States of America.